Okay, so have you ever had one of those moments where you're just like trying to get something done, something simple, and it feels like you're just hitting a wall at every turn?
Oh, absolutely. Like trying to renew your driver's
Ugh.
license uh, or like dealing with a cable company or something.
Exactly. And it just gets so frustrating because it's something that should be straightforward, but it turns into this like massive headache.
Ugh, yeah, totally.
Well, we actually heard from a listener named Veronica Sanchez, and her story really resonated with me.
Hmm.
She reached out and she was describing this incredibly difficult experience she had trying to deal with the Social Security Administration, the SSA.
Okay, yeah, a lot of people have to interact with them at some point, right?
Exactly. And in her case, she was desperately trying to get a medical letter that her parents really needed for their care.
Oh, wow. So it was like a time-sensitive kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. And she was saying that she spent hours and hours on hold with the SSA just trying to get through to someone who could help her.
Ugh, that's the worst when you just hear that hold music over and over again.
Right. And to make matters worse, she was eventually just disconnected, like after all that time.
Oh, no, come on.
Yeah. And she was just left feeling completely helpless and really worried about her parents and their medical care because without that letter, their treatment was basically on hold.
That's just awful. It makes you realize how much we all depend on these systems like Social Security working smoothly.
Right. It's not just about paperwork and bureaucracy. It's about people's lives and their well-being.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes the topic we're diving into today so important. You shared some articles with us that detail some pretty significant changes that are happening at the Social Security Administration.
Yeah, it seems like there's been a lot of news about it lately.
Right. And these changes were actually put in motion by the Trump administration, and they're being overseen by the Department of Government Efficiency, which, is also known as DOGE.
Okay, DOGE, I've heard
Yeah.
that name thrown around.
Yeah, and these articles we've got, they paint a pretty interesting picture. We're seeing reports of service disruptions, policies being changed, and just a lot of uncertainty about how it's all going to affect everyday people.
Right, because Social Security, it's not just some abstract government program. It's something that millions of Americans rely on.
Exactly. It impacts their retirement, their disability benefits their families. And that's why we wanted to take a deep dive into this, look at what's really going on and what it might mean for you, the listener.
So, we're aiming to cut through the noise, all the jargon, and really get to the heart of the matter.
Exactly.
What are these changes? What's the reasoning behind them? And most importantly, what are the potential consequences?
Right. And we want to do this without overwhelming you with, a ton of bureaucratic details.
Right. We want to make it clear and actually useful for people to understand.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What are the core changes that have been put into motion at the SSA?
Well, from the information we've gathered, it seems like a pretty substantial overhaul.
Okay.
One of the most significant changes is a planned reduction in the SSA's workforce.
Okay, so they're basically shrinking the number of people who work there.
Exactly. They're aiming to bring the number of employees down to about 50,000.
50,000. Okay, and how does that compare to like how many people they had before?
Well, previously they had approximately 57,000 employees.
Oh, wow. So that's a cut of around 7,000 people.
That's right. A pretty substantial decrease.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how that's going to affect their ability to, handle all the work that needs to be done.
That's definitely one of the big concerns that's being raised.
Okay, so fewer staff, what else?
Well, alongside the workforce reduction, they're also consolidating their regional offices.
Ah, okay, so less people and fewer offices to manage everything.
Exactly. They're going from 10 regional offices down to just 4.
Wow, okay, and what's the reasoning behind that?
Well, it's all part of a larger push for cost savings.
Ah, so it's all about tightening the belt, making things more efficient.
That seems to be the main driving force they're looking at.
Yeah.
Everything contracts, grants, property, technology, even things like printing and travel expenses.
I see, trying to squeeze savings out of every nook and cranny.
That's one way to put it. And they're projecting that these measures will lead to savings of over $800 million in fiscal year 2025.
$800 million, that's a pretty big chunk of change.
It is, however, one of the articles we looked at pointed out that when you compare that to the SSA's overall budget, it's actually a relatively small percentage of their total expenditures.
Well, that's interesting. So it's significant, but not like a game changer for their overall finances.
Right. It's all about perspective.
Okay, so we've got workforce reductions, office consolidations, cost-cutting measures. What else is on the list of changes?
Well, there's one more that's likely to have a pretty direct impact on people trying to access services.
Okay, what's that?
They're ending phone service for certain key functions.
Oh, ending phone service, like you won't be able to call them anymore.
Not for everything. This specifically applies to applying for retirement and survivor benefits, and for making changes to your direct deposit information.
Oh, wow. So those are pretty essential services.
Absolutely, things that a lot of people need to access.
And when does this take effect?
It's scheduled to start on April 14th of next year, 2025.
Okay, so just to be clear, if someone listening is planning to apply for retirement benefits, for example, after that date, they won't be able to just pick up the phone and do it anymore?
That's the situation.
Wow. Okay.
So those services will primarily be available if you go in person to a field office or if there's an online application option available.
Okay, so in person or online. And what about if someone needs to make changes to their direct deposit?
Same deal, in person or online, if that option exists.
Got it. So it seems like they're really pushing people towards those two avenues.
Definitely. And in connection with that, they've also implemented a new requirement for appointments for most services offered at their field offices.
Ah, okay, so no more just walking in and getting help.
Pretty much gone are the days of just showing up and waiting your turn.
I see. So basically they're trying to streamline the process by having everyone book appointments in advance?
That seems to be the idea.
Okay, so to recap, we're looking at fewer staff, fewer regional offices, a big push to cut costs, and significantly less access to services via phone.
That's the gist of it.
It really does sound like they're overhauling the way the SSA operates.
Yeah, it's a pretty major shift.
And you have to wonder how all of this is affecting people who are trying to actually, get the support they need from Social Security.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's about people's lives and their livelihoods.
Exactly. And we heard from Veronica Sanchez about her experience with those long phone hold times.
Right, that was really frustrating for her.
But it sounds like that might just be the tip of the iceberg.
Unfortunately, it seems that way.
What else are we seeing in terms of how these changes are impacting people?
Well, Veronica's experience with being on hold for hours and then getting disconnected is unfortunately not unique. Yet, reports indicate that the average wait time just to get a call back from the SAA is around 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours.
That's the average. And a lot of people don't even get through to speak with an agent at all.
Wow. So even if you're willing to wait that long, there's no guarantee you'll actually get to talk to someone.
Right. It's a major hurdle for anyone who needs to handle their Social Security matters over the phone.
Especially for people who might not have other options like reliable internet access or transportation to a field office.
Exactly. It creates a real barrier for them.
And what about the option of going in person? Is that any smoother?
Well, one of the articles mentioned a man named Andrew Taylor who was trying to get a letter from the SSA, and he's actually homeless.
Oh, wow.
And even though he went to a field office in person, he was told he would face a very long wait, and there was no guarantee he'd even get what he needed that day.
Oh, so even if you go in person, you might still end up empty-handed after a long wait.
It seems that way, and we also heard about a woman named Camila Sosa who had a similarly frustrating experience.
Mm-hmm.
She waited on the phone for hours, only to be told that she would then face another multi-hour wait if she went to the field office.
Oh my gosh, so it's like a double whammy.
Right, and this was without an appointment, which, as we discussed, are now mostly required.
So they're telling people to schedule appointments, but then you might have to call and wait for hours just to book the appointment.
It sounds like a bit of a catch-22.
It does. And for a lot of people, even getting to a field office for an appointment can be a huge obstacle, can't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially for seniors and people with disabilities.
Yeah, right. Like if you don't drive or have reliable transportation, it can be incredibly difficult.
And there was some really eye-opening data from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the CBPP, about this.
Yeah. What did their analysis show?
Well, they found that for something like 6 million seniors across the country, the trip to their nearest Social Security field office could be as far as 45 miles.
45 miles, that's a really long way, especially if you're elderly or have mobility issues.
And think about people who live in rural areas where public transportation might be limited or non-existent.
Right, or even places like Alaska where the distances between communities can be vast.
Exactly. They highlighted that in one of the articles, too. It's a real challenge for a lot of people.
It is. And speaking of challenges, what about the push towards using online services? Is that a realistic option for everyone?
Well, while the intention behind it might be good, there are definitely some hurdles.
Okay, like what?
Well, for starters, there have been reports of website outages and problems with the new online identity verification procedures.
Oh, so even if you want to go online, you might not be able to access your account.
Right, and on top of that, a significant portion of the senior population and people with disabilities may not have reliable internet access or the devices needed to use online services.
Right, like computers or smartphones.
Exactly. And even if they do have access, they might not have the technical skills or comfort level to navigate those systems.
So it's not exactly a user-friendly solution for everyone.
It definitely has its limitations.
It does. So we've got phone access being reduced, in-person visits becoming more difficult, and online services not being a perfect solution for everyone.
Right. It's creating a lot of complexity.
And are there specific groups of beneficiaries who are going to be particularly affected by all of this?
Yeah, there are a few that stand out.
Like who?
Well, retirees and people applying for survivor benefits will be directly hit by the elimination of phone applications.
Okay, so if you're in those situations, you'll have to go in person or use the online system if it's available.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And anyone needing to make changes to their direct deposit will face the same limitations.
Got it. And are there any other groups that are particularly vulnerable?
Yeah. Our sources highlighted a couple of important ones.
Okay.
First, there's currently no online option available for applying for survivor benefits.
Oh, wow. So in those cases, you absolutely have to go in person.
That's right, which means bereaved family members will have to make a trip to the SSA office during what's already a very difficult time.
Oh, that's tough. And are there any other situations like that?
Yeah, the same situation applies to parents who need to apply for benefits on behalf of a child after a parent's death, disability, or retirement.
So again, no online option. You have to go in person.
Right, and in both of those cases, the loss of phone service and the need for in-person interaction could create significant burdens.
It really could. Okay, so we've talked about the changes and how they're impacting people, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about the reasons behind all of this.
Okay.
What's the administration's justification for this pretty massive overhaul of the SSA?
Well, their stated goals are centered around a few key things.
Okay.
First, they want to achieve greater government efficiency, basically make things run more smoothly and cost-effectively.
Okay, makes sense.
Second, they're looking to reduce what they call a bloated workforce within the agency.
So they believe there are too many employees and it's costing too much.
That's their perspective.
Okay, and what's the third reason?
They want to strengthen safeguards against fraud within the system.
So make it harder for people to cheat the system. Okay, and what about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency? Where do they fit into all of this?
Well, they're essentially the ones overseeing this push for efficiency across government agencies, including the SSA.
Okay, so they're the ones making sure everything runs according to plan.
You could say that.
Okay, and what has the SSA itself said about all of this?
Well, they've acknowledged that there have been problems like long wait times and website issues.
Mm-hmm.
But they've also stated that some of these issues actually predate the current administration's initiative.
Oh, so they're saying it's not all their fault?
In a way, yeah. And they've emphasized that no customer-facing representatives have been laid off.
Okay, so no one who directly interacts with the public has lost their job.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
And they maintain that staff are being reassigned to frontline positions.
To better serve the public's needs in these new ways.
That's their argument.
Okay, so they're basically saying that they're trying to make the best of the situation and still serve the public effectively.
That's their perspective.
Okay, fair enough. But we've also heard a lot of pushback from advocacy groups and policy analysts, haven't we?
Oh, yeah. There's been significant opposition to these changes.
And what are their main arguments?
Well, a coalition of groups, including the American Association of People with Disabilities, has even filed a lawsuit against the SSA.
A lawsuit, wow.
Yeah, they're alleging that these changes have severely undermined the services that the SSA provides and caused significant and irreparable harm to beneficiaries.
Oh, so they're not just complaining, they're actually taking legal action.
Exactly. And their argument is that these changes are weakening the agency's ability to meet the needs of the people who rely on it.
By shifting essential functions to already overburdened local offices and cutting back on phone services.
Precisely.
Wow. And what specific concerns are they raising about the impact of these changes?
Well, one of the biggest worries is that these changes will inevitably lead to longer wait times for assistance.
Okay, that makes sense. If you have fewer staff and fewer offices, people are going to have to wait longer.
Right. And they're also concerned that these changes will disproportionately impact vulnerable populations.
Like seniors, individuals with disabilities, people in rural areas.
Exactly, those who already face barriers to accessing services.
Right. And what about the administration's focus on combating fraud? Are the advocacy groups buying that?
Well, some policy analysts are questioning the emphasis on fraud, particularly in areas like direct deposit changes.
Okay.
Because the SSA's own data shows very low rates of that type of fraudulent activity.
So they're saying it's not really a major problem that needs to be addressed.
That's their argument. And there's even a counter-argument that these changes could actually create more opportunities for fraud.
How so?
Well, they argue that all the confusion and uncertainty surrounding these changes could make people more vulnerable to scams.
Oh, I see. So scammers could take advantage of this situation.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of disagreement about whether these changes are actually going to make things more efficient or just create more problems.
That's a fair assessment.
Okay, so let's touch on the political context surrounding all of this for a moment.
Okay.
President Trump has made some pretty clear promises about Social Security, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has repeatedly stated that he wouldn't support cuts to Social Security benefits or any increase in the retirement age.
Okay, so he's basically promised to protect Social Security.
That's been his stance, and the administration has been careful to frame these SSA changes as efficiency measures, not benefit cuts.
Right. They're trying to draw a clear distinction between the two.
Exactly.
Okay, but one of the articles also mentioned President Trump's past statements about eliminating taxes on Social Security benefits.
Ah, yes, that's an important point.
How does that fit into the picture?
Well, while it might sound appealing to some, it could have serious implications for the long-term solvency of the Social Security Trust Fund.
Okay, explain that.
Well, the revenue from those taxes on benefits is a significant part of how Social Security is funded. And if you eliminate that revenue stream, it could lead to a huge loss of money over time, something like $1.5 trillion over the next decade, according to one estimate.
$1.5 trillion. Wow, that's a lot of money.
It is. And it could potentially cause the Social Security Trust Fund to become insolvent even sooner than currently projected.
Oh, so even though it wouldn't be an immediate cut to benefits, it could lead to problems down the road.
That's the concern.
Yeah.
So it's a complex issue with potentially far-reaching consequences.
It really is.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, the main thing is that the Social Security system is going through a major transformation right now.
Right. It's not business as usual.
Definitely. And these changes are driven by a focus on efficiency, cost reduction, and fraud prevention.
Okay, and how are these changes playing out in practice?
Well, we're seeing a reduction in workforce consolidation of offices, less access to phone services, and a push towards in-person appointments and online options. Right. And what's the impact of all of this on the people who rely on Social Security?
Well, it's creating challenges for many beneficiaries.
In what ways?
Well, it's becoming harder to reach the SSA. Wait times are increasing, and there are concerns about access for vulnerable populations.
Right, especially those who might not have easy access to transportation or the internet.
Exactly.
And it sounds like there's a lot of debate about whether these changes are actually beneficial or harmful in the long run.
There is. The administration views them as necessary steps towards a more efficient system.
While advocacy groups and experts have raised concerns about accessibility and potential negative consequences.
Right. It's a complex situation with valid arguments on both sides.
Okay, so as we end our deep dive today, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I'd encourage everyone to think about how these changes might affect you personally or the people you know.
Right, because this isn't just some abstract policy debate. It has real-world implications.
Absolutely. And it's worth considering the broader questions about the balance between government efficiency and the need to ensure that essential services are accessible to everyone who needs them.
Especially when it comes to something as vital as Social Security.
Right. And think about the long-term implications of these kinds of systemic changes. What might they mean for the future of our social safety net? It's a conversation we all need to be a part of.
It is. Thanks for breaking all of this down for us today.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.